Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Nourishing Conversations. Today, we're here with Ben and Esai from Green Box, sort of continuing another conversation centered around compost and the work that we're doing in the community here in Dane County. I think what's really interesting coming from our last episode with Elliot and jumping into this is really thinking about different scales and the work that Green Box is doing is sort of taking what Elliot's doing on a very community-based scale and scaling it up to sort of medium scale, I would say, like working with residents and some larger institutions and municipalities to start thinking about compost on a larger scale, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah.
So we'll start. Ben and Esai, do you guys want to introduce yourselves quickly and who you are and how you got into this work?
Sure, yeah. I'm Ben Stanger. I'm the founder and CEO of Green Box Compost.
I'm Esai Ponce, and I'm the head of marketing at Green Box Compost.
And you said how we got into it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so to start with, my family, we always composted, and we're kind of, not like a weird family, but kind of like when I was younger, I was raised vegetarian. I was so until maybe I was like 28, and now I do eat some meat now. But when we were younger, my parents also, we had a huge, like, I don't know, to me it seemed like an acre, it's probably smaller than that, vegetable garden, and we canned stuff and pickled stuff. We also had a big compost pile. And you know, when you're younger, you just kind of take what your family does as like for granted. Like everybody does that. Like, your family is universal. It's all the same everywhere. As you get older, you start to realize that's not the case, obviously. And so when I started going to school, I realized that not everybody did that, and I was like confused and kind of upset. Like, this seems like such a waste to throw this out. Like, I understood enough to know that it was kind of wasteful, but then as you get older, you start adding more complexity. You're like, okay, there's reasons people don't do this. It's hard, it takes time, it takes space, people are renting, stuff like that. So, eventually in high school, I remember talking with my dad about that and just like, the ideas of that. And he's like, yeah, I always wondered if maybe that could be a business. And we thought about it more and like, I don't think anybody would pay. You could just do it in your backyard. Why would anybody pay for that? Even though, like, knowing that there are reasons people can't do that. Fast forward to, went to college, studied physics, eventually moved to Chicago and had a bunch of kind of random jobs in sustainability. Green home builder, sustainable seafood company, Sitka Salmon Shares, actually.
Cool.
Yeah. And then eventually found a composting company in Chicago that I worked for. And that was pretty mind blowing because I started just before the pandemic, middle of 2019, and over the course of the next 2 years, we quintupled in size from 700 to 3,500 members, and just like I was like, oh, people will do this. People care enough about this, even if they don't have, the right setup. They have the means to kind of opt into a program like that, and so that felt really powerful to me. And then, of course, during the pandemic, everybody got kind of stir crazy in the best case scenario and worst case scenario. Obviously, there's other things going on. But I was one of those people that got stir crazy. And I just wanted to have more of an impact, be more involved. And so I moved back. I'm from the Madison area. I moved back to my parents' basement in Stoughton. Lived there for about a year as I was setting up Green Box. And if you want, we can go through kind of all the trials and travails of like the early stages of Green Box, but maybe I'll give it over to Esai for now.
Yeah, so how I got started with Green Box and overall just my sustainability journey, I didn't really start off, when I was younger, I didn't really know a whole lot about it. A lot of it was learning about it in college. I wasn't really like an outdoorsy kid. It's not like I was an indoor kid, but it was never like, oh, this kid's always outside, It was more just, as I got into college, I started to take classes in environmental studies. Shout out Peter Schwartzman. He was a really passionate teacher at Knox College, where we both went.
Yeah.
And he got me interested and involved. And eventually, I started looking more at the food cycle, even in college. I never knew that it would lead to this, obviously, but I was a biology major. But with the environmental studies minor that I had, one of the projects that we had was developing a food recovery network on our campus.
Oh, cool.
So me and 3 other students actually founded that chapter of the Food Recovery Network in Galesburg, Illinois. And that was a really cool experience to be able to see all of this food, hundreds of pounds every night from our food cafeterias going to waste that were instead going to a shelter for folks to consume and not be wasted. So that was kind of my introduction into like food cycles and
Cool.
that side of sustainability. And like I said, before that, I just didn't really have any base to grow off of. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the initial part. Moving into Madison, I was working jobs in biology, which was my major for a while, until my good friend Ben here said he was moving back to Madison, starting this company, and I said, if there's an opportunity for me to get involved, I'd love to do it.
That's funny. He's like, hire me. I was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Worked out.
It did, yeah. So it was fun, and yeah, that's how we got to where we're at now.
Cool. It's really interesting because I think we're similar ages, and like I've had this conversation before about sort of coming from like the environmental studies background in college, and like kind of I think for a lot of us doing this work right now at our age, it's like sort of having to forge a lot of like creating a business or creating positions for yourself to do the work that like you were studying at college and making it happen. So it's really cool, and I'm curious about that sort of incubation stage, how the business started, and what were those early trial and tribulations, and clearly one of them was like finding a way to hire Esai to get
so that's just like a thing that
No,
I
that's
never
great.
think of, but in terms of trials and tribulations, I mean, like the thing that I didn't realize starting a business like this is that like the setup is killer. That's the part that's really hard, and like permits, zoning, loans, insurance are all things that like are kind of inherently conservative. And I don't mean like big I mean like just like in their nature, like they want to make sure that what they're doing is not risky.
Right.
Which generally means that like if you're doing something new, which is kind of what we need
Right.
in this with these issues, people are gonna look at you sideways, especially if money or like property values are on the line.
Right.
And so, when I was first setting out, the first thing we had to do was find an actual location to do the composting. And that was really, really difficult. Like most of the zoning codes in the Madison area, like in Dane County broadly, actually expressly prohibited food scrap composting.
Okay.
Within the municipalities themselves, which,
Right.
Makes sense. Like
Sure.
there's houses and businesses and, like streets and it's busy and everything. People are worried about the adverse effects, obviously. And especially, when the zoning codes were made, maybe in the 80s, they're more worried about pests than they were about, climate change.
Right. Right.
So, the first 6 to 8 months of being in my parents' basement, kind of going crazy because like nothing's happening. I've quit my job. I'm burning my savings. Admittedly, living rent free. That's part of the deal, part of the reason to move back. But still, it's like, man, what am I doing? Was trying to figure out a place to compost and just calling and emailing municipalities and saying, hey, here's what I want to do. Would you let me do this? And, eventually, to their credit, finding Sun Prairie, who, was really about it. They were really trying to find a way to push sustainability in a really concrete way. And they said, listen, right now, our zoning code does prohibit food scrap composting, but you can either apply for a variance, or what we would like you to do is apply to amend the zoning code in that area to allow you, but also other people, in theory, who would want to do this, to compost.
Cool.
And so that's what we did, and that happened end of 2021. I moved in middle of 2021, like June, and by November, we had passed that zoning amendment unanimously through both the zoning committee and the general city council. So that was great, and like our first big win, big vote of confidence, I think. And it's been like the beginning of a really strong relationship with Sun Prairie to date, which is awesome. But then, then we had to close on the property and like start the actual. So, it's February 2022, and we're finally getting set up. So like 8 months later, and that was in my Subaru driving around with 25 buckets in the back, swapping out, doing 200 pounds of composting a week about. And unfortunately, the electric vans that I bought initially also ended up being duds, like for various reasons. They're kind of too good to be true. And so Esai was in some of those earlier routes where it's just like, I was so stressed because I thought these vans were just going to die on the route. And they're huge, heavy, behemoths kind of that if we had a tow would be hundreds of dollars that we
Wow.
didn't have. So
Yeah.
eventually we moved away from those and into my Subaru.
And I was stressed because we had to set up traffic cones
Yeah.
as it did die one time.
Yeah.
We got it still. We
Yeah.
got it restarted. So
Wow.
Yeah. So anyways, that's kind of like the beginning part, and Esai came on like 2 months after I started to help out with stuff. But maybe if you want. I don't know.
Do you want to talk about your early experience? I think it's really interesting, like, both this framework of what you're saying about, like, wanting to provide good jobs for people within this realm, and, like, you guys have built out a staff, which is really impressive.
Yeah, there's 8 of us now.
And I think, a lot of the people who are going to be on this podcast are entrepreneurs and maybe, like, self-starters, but might have a really small team. So I'm curious what it's like as, like, an employee of a startup kind of
pretend I'm not here.
organization.
So I mean, it was very interesting to. It's definitely a switch, right? I mean, I was going from a very stable position, which had like a lot of benefits and all of those good things, and then Ben here was like, "Hey, I've got no benefits. And I can't pay you as much."
I was
but,
upfront about
it. Do you want to join? And I still said yes because I thought it was something that. I needed to do for myself. It's really hard to get outside of your bubble, I guess, your safety net, and try to do something a little bit more risky.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see that Ben was already taking the majority of the risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also I could see that he was really passionate about it. So I said, this seems like something I could be, I could see myself fitting in, obviously with my friend, and also it's something that I feel like I could do a good job at and assist in whatever way was needed. Initially, I didn't think the ways that I'd be assisting would be getting my hands super, super dirty, but those boundaries soon fell with how much work we had to do in that first year. So there were definitely times and weeks where we were putting in, 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, and it was, get in before dark and leave after dark, and it was tough. And it was a lot of time just us two, which,
a lot of silent car rides back from the warehouse where it's like,
a lot of, if the van broke down, it was a bad day, right? If there were issues on the route, it was a bad day. But, from my perspective, I still look back and am happy that I made that decision to switch. Because, I mean, I'm doing something that I feel like does something good for the world. I'm producing something that makes the world a better place. You would hope, at least assume. And I wouldn't look back and have any regrets about it at all.
That's really cool.
What other aspects of the question did I miss?
No, that's perfect. I mean, it's really cool, and I'm curious. I'd love to continue the conversation around, like, what are some of the lessons you learned? What were some of the things you faced? I think you did a great job talking about zoning. I think that's fascinating. And the support of Sun Prairie, that's really cool as well. But it's funny to hear these stories. Obviously, that's what goes into starting a business, and like it's tough work. But it's also been 3 years almost. Like you guys, from my perception, have been incredibly successful in a short amount of time too. So maybe I don't know. You tell me what you think about that and how that experience has grown for you two.
From day one to be started, it was very chaotic in a good way. I mean, you have to be able to adapt because we're starting something completely new to both of us. Neither one of us were a business owner before. We didn't really have all of that guidance to go into. So you have to be adaptable and have to just kind of accept and embrace the chaos a little bit. But, to your point, after the first year and a couple months, we hired our first full-time person. We hired another part-time person. We were able to slowly put together all of these pieces that made those, big waves a little smaller in terms of okay, it's a little bit chiller, and now it's, something caught on fire. Let's. So I think that, like you said, we have been really successful and blessed in that sort of department where we have been able to control and contain that chaos, and that's been something that I'm really proud of us for doing. Because when it was just us, it was a lot, and now that we have this full team, I feel like everyone is, has a good route forward, path forward.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think like the biggest thing that I can say about that is like, people are like incredibly important, especially early on, and I mean, especially like internally, people who are on the team, and so having Esai, yeah, from the beginning was well, no, and I really want to highlight that
Yeah,
because
for
like
sure.
when me and Esai talked in like March for him to start in April part time was like he was going to be doing marketing stuff.
Mhm.
And very quickly that became about 10% of his job. And the other 90% was helping me on routes, doing other routes, helping me with composting, and then eventually just like doing those things like in tandem with me, or you're both just like doing both those things. Um, and then, as you said, like piecing together more people, and like one of the great things about working in this space is like, yeah, people care. Like a lot of people feel very passionate about this stuff because it's like pressing now. People can see it happening. I mean, like the hurricanes from a month or so ago. Fires that like prevented somebody from speaking at a conference I was at last Friday.
Wow.
It's like
Wow.
there's people feel that and like feel like they care about the future and they want to do something, but like again, there's not like that avenue. So we like the biggest thing I can say is like those people clearly are good people that care, and like I want to give them an avenue to like express that in terms of like real concrete work in this space. And so like we've been really really lucky to like we whenever we put out a job application, like immediately, if not before, we have the position filled basically. The longest we've had a job application open is like 2 weeks.
Right.
And so just being able to like make a space where people can like can work there, and like admittedly, as Asai was saying, like he left a place that paid him better, had better benefits, and like so we're not up to the point where I'm satisfied with like the place that we're working. Like this is not the ending place in terms of like quality of life for employees, but we now have full benefits. We're about to have 401k. It's like
Wow.
for me, that's really personally satisfying, is being able to like piece together benefits so that this team that we're piecing together also who can like, I mean, my thought is like, we always want to be like better prepared for the next disaster. Like the next disaster is like not going to put us out of commission nearly as much as the one before, because now, again, there's 8 of us working there. We have capacity to like absorb whatever stumbling block comes our way. So kind of like marrying those two things again of like creating a team that can handle stuff, but also creating a space where that team can thrive, and we don't have to worry nearly as much about turnover, and we know that people are bought in and they care what they're doing and they care about each other, so we can care about the planet, and that's like it's care all the way around.
It's amazing. Can I get you guys to talk a little bit just about the business model itself?
Yeah.
And like
Oh, yeah.
how it functions? No, this is a great discussion. And I'd love to just a tie-in of like how people in the community can get involved with composting, whether that's at an individual level or higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do a little bit about the basic business model maybe, and then you can do the tie-in stuff maybe,
Sure.
or I don't know. We'll just tag team it. So the way that I initially set up Green Box was like, we're gonna do residential composting because that's what I know from the place I worked in Chicago. And the big difference between here and there is like initially I thought we were not going to compost like for ourselves. Somebody else would compost. We're just going to be a hauler. But and this is a big aspect I forgot to mention is like because of those zoning laws and everything, and like just like the situation we're in, there was actually no composting in the area. So we had to piece together our own food scrap composting. So like between the place I used to work and the place I work in Green Box, the big difference is that we do our own composting. And that's really important for, I think, our longevity. Like it gives us that full life cycle overview. We know that what we're doing is creating high quality finished product. And like that's really important to know that like we are truly recycling. It's all happening in-house. But the basic idea is we collect a 4-gallon bucket every other week from our residential members. We now have 900 or so residential members. Again, starting from 25, 2.5, 3 years ago. So that's really satisfying growth. We compost that in-house, turn it into high quality, soil amendment at the end of the day. We also work with restaurants, coffee shops, food producers, offices. We work with Epic, AmFam, Exact Sciences, Monona Terrace, UW Health, places like that. So a lot of big names in the community. And currently we're composting about 12,000 pounds a week. And hoping to, like, my goal for, in the next few years is that we're 10 times that.
Wow.
Because then we'll really start making a real impact, and again, we'll be able to support a larger team with better benefits and pay, and really grow into that. So, yeah, I guess the one thing I'll say about the commercial stuff again is we use larger receptacles for that, 35-gallon carts that we also swap out and clean each time, and then 65-gallon carts that we tip in a more conventional waste hauling manner into the back of essentially a small garbage truck.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure I missed some stuff, so I'll hand it over to Esai maybe to make it more coherent.
Yeah, no, I mean that pretty much covers it. I'd say just for people who are interested in getting involved on the residential level, we make it hopefully pretty easy just by signing up online, and we have myself and some other people on our customer service team that will reach out and answer any questions if you have them, as well as for like events. We do event composting. So if anyone has an event coming up that they're interested in composting for and having it more of a renewable event, make sure that you reach out to us. And then we do like multi-unit apartment building composting. So we're happy to kind of make a plan for whatever you would need. I'll let Ben talk about municipalities later because we do have a couple of municipal programs, or at least one municipal program, and working on others, so we'll see.
Cool.
But yeah, that's how you can get involved.
Great. And I think that's a perfect segue because I was curious you mentioned a number, I think you said 12,000 a week, and you want to 10x that in what span of time?
I mean, it's hard to say, but I think
That's
ideally 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
We've more than 10x in the last 2 years. We've started 200 pounds. And admittedly, as we grow, I think it'll be harder to scale in that way. But in another sense, I think it'll be easier. Like, we started with no track record, with no name to trade on, no nothing. And now I think, everybody doesn't know us, but people who know about sustainability or know about composting generally, who have done that Google search, know about us. And so I think that's that's a really big shift. And so I think that'll allow us to spread geographically and also get deeper into wherever we are at. So
yeah. So if you can talk about that vision for really scaling up, and we had an interesting conversation before the podcast started about and it ties into our last conversation with Elliot about not viewing the sort of the food cycle as a linear line, especially at that end point. You were sort of talking about how if you do view it as a linear point, that end point really just continues to expand and expand.
Totally.
And we were talking with Elliot about really viewing it as a full cycle and building soil back and all that kind of stuff. So I think it just talks to the need for the work that you're doing, and maybe fits into that vision for you of really scaling up.
Totally, yeah. So, wow, a lot to...
Sorry.
No, it's good. My mind has a tendency to go 8 different directions. So I think the first thing I'll start with is just the idea of the linear versus circular model.
Right.
And it's stuff that everybody talks about, everybody knows. I think a lot of people know. Circular is better. That's what sustainability is. It's trying to bend that line back together to connect it. And as you said, the way I think about it is if you have that linear kind of model, if you have you picture particles, mass, whatever, in this case, food scraps going from one point to the other. If you start here with a production and it goes down this conveyor belt to the end of its life, this end of life pile just keeps growing and growing and growing. And that's evidenced by, for example, the Dane County landfill, that expansion south of 12 and 18 to it's going to take over half of the Yahara golf course. So that's another, again, we're seeing all these concrete examples of what these unsustainable systems are creating. And that's a lot of it's just legacy. It's nobody's fault currently, but it is something we have to address. And so if you think about composting in terms of food scraps and what can happen if you kind of create that circular system, is that instead of having this endpoint that grows and grows and grows, as long as essentially, let's call it the metabolism of a city or an area, Dane County, for example, you have a certain throughput, or again, I studied physics, so I think of it as a flux, a vector through an area, basically. It's if you have an area that's large enough, say a composting site, if it's large enough for Dane County, it never has to grow. As long as you have the right materials and the right ratios of carbon and nitrogen, you can just keep creating this finished product that then goes onto the land. And then to tie it even broader, one, methane emission reduction, and then carbon sequestration in the land. And then finally, you just Google soil in the U.S. We're losing it at a crazy rate because of conventional agriculture. So we start applying this en masse to, let's say, all the farms around Dane County.
Yeah.
Suddenly we're not losing nearly as much.
Right.
And we don't have the runoff into the lakes. We don't have the polluted waterways, all these things. So it's like you start with this one idea and it just grows and grows and grows and has all these rebounding effects everywhere
Right.
else. And so again, not to hit this too hard over and over, but what I hope for Green Box is that we are this nucleus of really strong interaction directly with this particular thing that will have those ripple effects further out.
Cool.
In terms of what that means for trying to divert 10 times the waste, let's say 2 years from now.
Right.
I don't exactly know what it will look like, but again, kind of having a name to trade on, having a track record, and having more resources to do all that stuff. We've had to bootstrap a lot. I mean, as we grow, having the ability to access that financing that was harder because people didn't know us and we're doing a weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, suddenly people know us better and the thing's less weird because everybody's doing it,
Right,
and so
right.
we can access that along with as things start to get unfortunately I think more dire in the surrounding area. People I think will feel the heat quite literally a bit more and be like, okay, we got to do something.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that we will be there to be like, okay, this won't fix everything, but it is a step in the right direction and we can make it really easy for you.
Right.
We will provide all of the know-how, all the logistics, all the processing capabilities. We'll be there. Slot us in, we'll take over.
Right.
And so that's really what I hope and what people will start to realize and work with, down the line. In terms of, I think where you get those big numbers from is large-scale food processing, grocery stores, and municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
Those first two, quite frankly, they're at a certain scale. There's economic reasons for them to do that as opposed to environmental. I'm always wary of stressing economics over environment because if you do that, you put it on the same playing field as other things that might be a better economic benefit.
Sure.
And then if you trade on that, you could just not do the environmental thing. So
Right.
I always stress that our goal is not to be price parity with large scale waste hauling because we have a completely different philosophy and different goal. To get towards the municipality side of things, that it's kind of an open question exactly how that will work. But the current model we have basically is that municipalities will subsidize our residential programs. And to date, we have one of those situations in the village of Oregon, just south of Madison. And the agreement is such that instead of $26 a month for our residential service, it's $10 a month. So
Wow.
pretty significant.
Yeah.
And so we've seen a pretty significant uptake in that community where we started, last April. We're at about 50 members, whereas, I think without that, we'd be at maybe 10,
Wow.
So a pretty big increase.
Yeah.
It's still just the start of something, and that's what I tell all these municipalities, whatever we start now is not going to be big, but it'll shorten the timeline to getting to something big.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so hopefully that answered some of that question.
What are all the municipalities within Dane County that can access your services? Or areas or maybe
Pretty
all?
much, I won't say all of them. It's, the core of the Madison area, you think of, so west out to Middleton, Verona, east out to Cottage Grove and Sun Prairie, north to Wanakee, DeForest, Windsor kind of area, and then south. Initially, we've just been going to the Fitchburg, Verona area, but we added in recently Oregon and then Stoughton, and now we're going to Mount Horeb as well.
And
Yeah.
McFarland as well.
And McFarland side, yeah, thank you.
So that is pretty much all of it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to say that because
Yeah.
I think really important, one of the big things to recognize is there are people who don't live in those areas, and it's
Certainly.
the surrounding smaller, I don't know, 1 to 5,000
Yeah.
person communities, and also my goal is very soon hopefully to get outside of Dane County more consistently
Yeah.
and to kind of spread geographically because
Cool.
it'll be easier I think to hit the ground running just with all the lessons we've learned, but also again with being able to go to municipalities and say, hey, this is what we can offer you. I want to really jumpstart this and get rolling in your community so they can have a really turnkey solution in places that I think a lot of times are kind of overlooked.
Absolutely. So I'll ask one last major question, and then we'll wrap it up. But I have a follow-up question too. But what sort of policy specifically would be helpful for helping you reach that goal of really expanding and increasing production?
Totally. I mean, the really, I think, not easy but simple, concrete ones are baseline, making it more expensive to throw out trash, so that people are incentivized to, separate out different, quotients as they call it. In this case, food scraps, and do something more sustainable with it. Whereas, because like right now, there's a baseline fee, and there's no, like, we can't, because we're small, we can't really compete with just like, oh, let's put it in the landfill. People have to really care, which is great, and like we really appreciate people that do. And we're trying to, again, like, I don't want to always compete on economic terms, because those economic models are based on a lot of externalities that we're trying to reincorporate. So like, we can't compete on those. But a way to make us more competitive is to kind of tax landfill tipping to kind of approximate those externalities that right now, the environment, the fact that, landfills are gross, things like that. Like, it should be harder to landfill stuff, like, universally. And so, for example, there are a lot of other municipalities and states that have state and county and city tipping fee taxes for landfills, and that makes composting a lot more realistic there. Right. And if you talk to any composter like us, or of any size really, they'll say the biggest inhibitor to their growth is landfill tipping fees, and the fact that they're usually really cheap.
Right.
And so if you can up those, that makes our job a lot easier, and that would be really helpful. The other thing is, on the flip side, mandates. We've seen some success. I think especially the best case study is in Massachusetts. They had a lot of success with mandates of anybody who makes more than 1,000 pounds of food scraps per week and they're within 50 miles of a place in compost that they have to compost. Wow. Somehow they have to get it there, and they have really good enforcement and really good checking of those methods, and it's had a really big impact. And so, those are the kind of like the two sides of like what I think would be really, really useful for making this grow much larger. But there's all sorts of other things that would be helpful. I think those are just like the two simplest ones that I can articulate best right now.
No, that's amazing. Thank you. So what we've been doing on this podcast for the last question is just a general question. It can relate to composting and the work that you guys do, but it could be related to anything else as you experience food in Dane County. And the question is, if you had a magic wand and could change anything about our local food system, what would it be? And maybe we can start with this one. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't prepare for this.
Nobody prepares for this one, yes.
If I had a magic wand.
Yeah, you could change one thing about the food system, what would it be?
I think personally, I like the lakes to be clean. I think the lakes are really, really, they're important. I think they're really a beautiful part of what makes Madison great. So I would change something with the runoff, basically make it so that compost is used instead of this fertilizer that allows this runoff to go into our lakes and pollute them. So that would be my magic wand.
I think that's a great answer.
Yeah. I'll say that was pretty much almost exactly what I'm going to say. And I'm just going to...
A good team.
Yeah. And the reason I'll say it is that, similar to Esai, I think lakes, and like, I think a lot of people I feel that there's this trend towards sameness in a lot of places. And one of the big defining features of Madison, the thing that makes it not same as everything else, are the lakes. And that's really an awesome feature. And we should really treat it with respect, because it is part of what defines us as, Madisonians. And so like really trying to figure out ways to handle that. And I think in terms of like the biggest thing I would change is that, everybody within Dane County, let's say the greater, Yahara watershed, was using compost instead of, injecting manure or synthetic fertilizers for two reasons. One is that, it would solve this lake issue quite a bit. Instead of running off, it would actually sequester, organic compounds, rainwater. It would keep things where they're supposed to be on the soil. It would build up the soil. It would create a more sustainable long-term future for our food system. But also, quite frankly, it would create a market for us to sell large quantities of finished compost in the area, and that would redound to everybody's benefit as well. I mean, it would create more jobs in this area for us.
Yeah.
It would allow us to kind of make more revenue on the back end as opposed to charging people up front, and it would it just have a lot of great benefits all around. I'll say that with outside of I think again, if I could get some of those policy changes that we were talking about earlier, those would look great also.
The taxing and the mandates.
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks you both for joining us. It was a really great conversation, and it's cool to start off at that local level with Elliot and now move up into a larger framework for composting.
Okay.
So I think all of our viewers should be pretty aware of the benefits of composting
Yeah, I'm sure they are,
and ways that they can tap in. So thanks, guys.
And we love Elliot too. It's awesome.
Yeah,
He's a great guy.
I know you guys have like a lot of collaboration.
Yeah,
That's
we
really
work
cool.
together.
So
We want to work more with him, so excited about that. Yeah.
just let people know how to find you guys, whether that's social media or website or stuff like that.
I'll do the easy one.
Yeah.
www.withgreenbox. No, sorry. I messed it up. Shoot.
Cut.
Withgreenbox.com. That's it. Esai, you take over.
At www.withgreenbox.com. You can email us at compost@withgreenbox.com. And then we are on most socials as Greenbox Compost _1.
I think it's just one, no underscore.
We'll find
One.
it. We'll link it.
Just,
Yeah.
If you Google
Greenbox Compost, you'll
Green
find
Box
us.
Compost, you should find us.
And there is a Greenbox company apparently in Madison that was a moving company.
Oh, yeah.
That's not us.
That's not us,
So make sure you add the compost too.
Yeah.
Green Box Compost. Cool. Thanks
Yeah.
so much, guys. Yeah, thanks for
Thank
listening
you,
to
Noah.
another
Thanks,
episode.
appreciate it.